In this section, we are going to have discussion of the ascending pathways or the sensory pathways in central nervous system. These are also called as ascending tracts. So there are three main types of ascending tracts in sensory physiology. So these are, the first one is called as the posterior column. Posterior column also called as the medial Leminiscal system or the dorsal column. Second one is called as the spinothalamic tract, and third one is called as the spinocerebellar tract. So these are three ascending tracts in the sensory physiology: posterior column, spinothalamic tracts, and spinocerebellar tracts. Now let us start with the spinocerebellar tract. This spinocerebellar tract, it plays a very important role in the unconscious proprioception. In unconscious proprioception, conscious proprioception is a function of posterior column. So the sensations of unconscious proprioception are carried by spinocerebellar tracts, and these tracts are of two types: dorsal spinocerebellar tracts and ventral spinocerebellar tracts. So the sensations of dorsal carried by dorsal spinocerebellar tracts, the fibers are uncrossed, whereas ventral spinocerebellar tracts, these fibers cross. So dorsal is uncrossed and ventral is crossed. So there's not much else that we can study about spinocerebellar tracts. Now let us go to these two tracts, which are very important and which we'll study in detail. So posterior column or the medial lemniscal system, the sensations which are carried through this tract, these are sensations of fine touch, vibration, conscious proprioception. Now conscious proprioception is carried by posterior column, whereas unconscious is carried by the spinocerebellar tracts. And the localization, 2-point discrimination, and the sterognosis. So these sensations, they are all carried by the dorsal column or the medial lemniscal system. Now we'll discuss this posterior column, the structure and everything in detail in using a diagram in a few moments. Spinothalamic tracts, they are of two types. One is called as the anterior spinothalamic tracts, and some fibers of this tract, they cross to the other side and form lateral spinothalamic tract. So the sensations which are carried by these tracts, the sensations carried by the anterior spinothalamic tracts, these are, so first let us see the lateral spinothalamic tract. It carries sensations of pain and temperature, and the anterior spinothalamic tract, it carries sensations of crude touch. Now again, crude touch sensations, they are carried by anterior spinothalamic, whereas fine touch sensations are carried by posterior column. So crude touch, pressure, tickle, itch, tickle, and some sexual sensations. So these are various sensations which are carried by anterior spinothalamic tracts. So these are three different types of tracts that we have to discuss. So now we'll discuss in detail the posterior column and the spinothalamic tract. Before that, let us brush up some facts about the spinal cord and about various types of cells. So if this is section of a spinal cord, this is the gray matter. So in between is the spinal canal. Now this is the dorsal root, this is dorsal root ganglion, this is the ventral root, and they join together and form the spinal nerve. So this here is the spinal nerve. So this is the dorsal root ganglion, which contains dorsal root ganglion cell. These are the dorsal and the ventral horns of spinal cord. Dorsal horn of spinal cord, it is sensory in nature, and this is the ventral horn of spinal cord, which is motor in nature. So all the sensations, whether sensations of fine touch, vibration, temperature, etc., they go to the dorsal horn of spinal cord, and from there they ascend upward to the higher centers. So dorsal ganglion contains a cell called as DRG cell or dorsal root ganglion cell. Now this dorsal root ganglion cell, it is a pseudo unipolar cell. It appears it has two poles. It has one pole, but it actually has two poles. One is the peripheral process and other is the central process. So it is a pseudo unipolar cell, dorsal root ganglion cell. So sensations, they are carried by peripheral processes from skin to the dorsal root ganglion, and central process carries them towards the spinal cord. Now let us start the discussion of the posterior column or the dorsal column or the medial lemniscal system. So if this is the section of the spinal cord, this is the spinal canal, dorsal root ganglion, ventral root, and this is the spinal nerve. So this is the section of spinal cord. This is the dorsal dorsal root ganglion cell. These are the peripheral and the central processes of the DRG cell. So we are discussing posterior column, also called as the medial lemniscal system. Now why it's called as medial lemniscal system, we'll understand it from the diagram, because in the diagram these fibers they cross at the level of medial lemnisca in the medulla, so it's called as medial lemniscal system. So this is the dorsal root ganglion cell. Now first of all, let us draw the midline. So this is the midline. Now above the section of spinal cord, we will draw a section of medulla oblongata. So this is the section of medulla at the level of nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus. So this is the medulla. So these are the two pyramids of the medulla. This is the medial lemniscus of each side. So they are the medial lemniscus of each side. And above the medial lemniscus there is nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus. So this is nucleus gracilis and nucleus gracilis of other side, and this is nucleus cuneatus. So let us name them nucleus cuneatus, and the green one is the nucleus gracilis. Now above the medulla, let us draw a section of the cerebral cortex, which also shows the thalamus. So this is the cerebral cortex, this is the lateral sulcus, this is the superior temporal gyrus, again this is the cortex lateral sulcus. Now this is a coronal section which passes through the sensory cortex or the postcentral gyrus, and these are the two thalami. So this is the thalamus of one side, this is thalamus of other side, and this is the sensory cortex. So by sensory cortex, what I mean is that this is a coronal section which passes through the postcentral gyrus of the cerebrum, and it coincides with Brodmann areas 3, 1 and 2. Okay, now the fibers of the posterior column, they carry sensations of fine touch, vibration, conscious proprioception, etc. So these are the sensations which are carried by this. Let us say this is skin, so there is a sensation of fine touch at the skin, so the sensations are carried by the fibers of the posterior column. So the first order sensory neuron in this case is the dorsal root ganglion cell. So the fibers from the periphery, they are carried by the dorsal root ganglion cell. So DRG cell, this is the first order cell, it carries fibers towards the spinal cord. Now these fibers, they do not cross in the spinal cord. Crossing of fibers does not occur in the spinal cord. These fibers directly ascend upwards and reach medulla, where they synapse in nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus. Now the fibers which come from the upper part of body, they mainly go to nucleus cuneatus, and fibers from the lower part of body, they go to the nucleus gracilis. So these fibers, they go to nucleus cuneatus and nucleus gracilis, from where second order sensory neurons arise. And these second order sensory neurons, then they cross to the opposite side, they cross the midline and pass through the medial lemniscus upward to the thalamus. So second order sensory neurons arise from the medulla, that is from nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus, and these neurons, they cross to the opposite side and they go to the medial lemniscus of the opposite side, from where they ascend to the thalamus of that side. So crossing of fibers of the posterior column occurs at the level of medulla, and these fibers which cross internally in the medulla, they are called as internal arcuate fibers. And they reach the thalamus. So again, there are some fibers of nucleus cuneatus, and the second order neuron, it crosses to the opposite side. Now these fibers, they go to the thalamus. The nucleus of the thalamus, where these fibers reach, this is called as the ventro-posterolateral nucleus of thalamus, or the VPL nucleus of thalamus. So the third order sensory neurons, they arise from this ventro-posterolateral nucleus and go to the sensory cortex, which is the postcentral gyrus. So third order sensory neurons, they arise from the thalamus, that's from the VPL nucleus of the thalamus. So this is the posterior column. First order cell is the dorsal root ganglion, second is nucleus gracilis, nucleus cuneatus, and third order neurons arise from the ventro-posterior lateral nucleus of the thalamus. Crossing of fibers occurs at the level of medulla, and the sensations carried are fine touch, vibration, conscious proprioception, localization, two-point discrimination, and stereognosis. So whenever there is lesion of the posterior column, in case of lesion of posterior column, these sensations will not be carried to the sensory cortex. As a result, there will be loss of these sensations. There is loss of localization, loss of two-point discrimination, loss of stereognosis in case of lesion of posterior column. Now another important thing that we need to discuss here is about these fibers here. Now the fibers bring sensations from the skin of cervical region, thoracic region, lumbar region, as well as sacral region. So if we see it in a separate diagram, the fibers of the cervical region and the thoracic region, they lie in the lateral areas, and the fibers of lumbar and sacral region lie in the medial areas. So this is the arrangement from lateral to medial. The fibers of the cervical and lateral regions, they form fasciculus gracilis, and these fibers go to the nucleus gracilis. Fibers of cervical and thoracic region form fasciculus cuneatus, and these fibers go to the nucleus cuneatus in the medulla. Now these fibers, fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus, they are also called as tracts of Gall and Burdage. Tracts of Gall and Burdage. Let us discuss another important sensory tract, which is called as the spinothalamic tract. Spinothalamic tracts are very important tracts because most of the important sensations, they are carried through these tracts. Again, if we take a look, it consists of anterior and lateral spinothalamic tracts. The fibers which cross, they form lateral spinothalamic tracts, which carry sensations for pain and temperature. Remaining fibers form anterior spinothalamic tract, which carry sensations for crude, touch, pressure, tickle, itch, and some sexual sensations. So let us start the discussion of spinothalamic tract with a simple cross section of the spinal cord. So this is the cross section of a spinal cord. This is the gray matter of spinal cord, dorsal horn, ventral horn, spinal canal, dorsal root ganglion, ventral root, and this here is the spinal canal. This is the spinal canal. This is the spinal nerve. Now this here is the skin from which various sensations will be carried. Now above the spinal cord, so first let us draw the midline. Now above spinal cord, let us draw a coronal section passing through the post-central gyrus of the cerebrum, which shows the sensory cortex along with thalami. So this is the cerebral cortex, this is the lateral sulcus, superior temporal gyrus, and these are the two thalami. So this is thalamus of one side and thalamus of other side. So this spinal cord, thalamus, and this above this upper part is the sensory cortex. Now let us say the skin is stimulated for pain and temperature. So the sensations of these pain and temperature, they will be carried through the lateral spinothalamic tract. So different aspects that we need to study are the first order neurons, second order cells, third order cells, and the crossing of fibers. So let us say the skin here is stimulated for pain or temperature sensations, which are carried through these tracts. So the first cell, the first order sensory neuron, is again the dorsal root ganglion cell. So DRG cell is the first order sensory neuron. In this case, it's going to, the peripheral process are going to carry impulses from the periphery towards the dorsal root ganglion. Now in the posterior column, these fibers crossed at the medulla, internal arcuate fibers. Here these fibers cross at the level of spinal cord. So crossing in spinothalamic tract occurs at the level of spinal cord, not at the level of medulla. And the second order sensory neuron is the dorsal horn cell of the spinal cord. So the first synapse is in the dorsal horn itself, and the second order neuron then crosses to the opposite side and forms lateral spinothalamic tract. So second order sensory neuron goes to the thalamus, and this second order sensory neuron is basically the cell of the dorsal root ganglion of the cell of the dorsal root of spinal cord. So this is the central second order cell. It goes to the thalamus and the ventro-posterior-lateral nucleus of thalamus, from which third order neurons arise. So third order neurons arise from the thalamus, that is from the ventro-posterior-lateral nucleus of thalamus, and they go to the sensory cortex. So this simple diagram shows the a pathway of the spinothalamic tracts, and this is how the sensations of pain, temperature, and other like crude touch pressure are carried. Now if we take a look here, since the fibers undergo crossing, therefore the cervical fibers which were lateral in the posterior column, here they become medial. Similarly, from cervical to sacral, the direction is reversed. So sacral fibers are the most lateral and cervical fibers are the most medial. So this is the dorsal, this is the spinothalamic tract, which carries sensations for pain, temperature, and other things that we already discussed. Now this sensory cortex, whenever there is lesion of the sensory cortex, the fibers, the sensations which are carried by the posterior column, they are lost. All these sensations are lost, such as localization, 2-point discriminant, stereognosis. But the sensations carried by spinothalamic tract, such as pain and temperature, they are not lost. So these sensations, pain, temperature, these are not lost in case of lesion in the sensory cortex. So it means that these pain and temperature senses, etc., which are carried through the spinothalamic tracts, they are interpreted in medulla and midbrain, not in the sensory cortex. So these fibers are not lost, these sensations are not lost in case of lesion of the sensory cortex. So this is the spinothalamic tract and some basic points about the sensations carried through this tract. Now we'll discuss one of the important sensations which is carried by this tract, which is called as pain. So let us try to understand the physiology of pain. As we all studied, the sensations for pain, they are carried through spinothalamic tracts. Now, in the spinothalamic tracts, there are actually two types of fibers for pain. Some fibers carry the sensation of fast pain, and some fibers carry sensations of slow pain. So there are differences between these fibers. So fast pain, it is also called as sharp pain, stabbing pain, stabbing pain, even pricking pain. So these are synonymous terms for fast pain. On the other hand, slow pain is called as dull pain. It's also called as aching pain. Slow pain is called as dull pain and aching pain. Fast pain, it's also called as good pain. Fast pain is called as good pain, while as slow pain is called as bad pain. Now the question is, why is fast pain called as good pain and why is slow pain called as bad pain? So let us take an example. Let us say there is a child and he steps on a pointed object. So he is going to experience some pain sensation on stepping on a pointed object. So the first pain that he is going to experience in almost 0.1 second, this is called as the fast pain. So the pain he is going to experience initially is the fast pain, and this pain is going to result in flexor withdrawal reflex. So the boy will he will withdraw his foot from the pointed object because of a reflex, flexor withdrawal reflex, which will be stimulated by fast pain. After some time, say after 1 second, the child will experience more pain, and that pain will be slow pain, which will be experienced almost after 1 second. Now this slow pain, the pathway will give collaterals which will stimulate autonomic centers. So the autonomic symptoms such as increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, which are associated with pain, they are because of slow pain. And because of this reason, this pain is called as bad pain, because these symptoms, they are not liked by individuals, they are uncomfortable symptoms. The fibers which carry sensations for the fast pain, they are A delta type of fibers, which are actually myelinated fibers. They are myelinated fibers and the velocity of conduction is fast, so this pain is felt in almost 0.1 seconds. On the other hand, sensations of slow pain, they are carried by C fibers, and it takes almost 1 second for the impulses to reach. So this pain is felt in 1 second, so the velocity is slow as compared to fast pain. The neurotransmitter in case of fast pain is the glutamate, whereas neurotransmitter in case of slow pain is substance P. It is substance P. Another important difference between fast pain and slow pain is the stimulus which starts fast pain and slow pain. So fast pain, it occurs initially whenever there is a mechanical stimulus or a thermal stimulus, like when you touch a hot object or whenever there is a pinprick. Whereas slow pain, it occurs because of chemical mediators. For example, inflammatory pain, which occurs due to histamine, serotonin, or even bradykinin, that is the slow pain. So stimulus is mainly the chemical stimulus in case of slow pain. So pathway for both fast and slow pain is same, that is the lateral spinothalamic tract. The only difference is in the type of fibers. Okay, now let us take a look at the pathway of pain. So pathway is the same, that is lateral spinothalamic tract, which we already discussed. Now let us try to understand it in a simplified form. So this is the pathway, same for both types of pain. The only difference is in the type of fibers. So in the same tract there will be presence of two type of fibers. So let us say this is one type of fiber and this is another type of fiber, and both these fibers are present in the same tract, that's in the lateral spinothalamic tract. So these fibers, they go to the thalamus, like the lateral spinothalamic tract, second order neurons go to the thalamus, so these fibers go to the thalamus. So this here is the spinal cord, the section of spinal cord. This is the gray matter of spinal cord, and so these are the second order neurons for the pain pathway carried by lateral spinothalamic tract. So the blue fibers are the C type of fibers for slow pain, and green fibers are A delta type of fibers for fast pain. Now the fibers for the slow pain, in the pathway they give various collaterals. So these collaterals, they synapse with, one of the collateral synapses with the reticular formation of the brainstem, other collateral, and it stimulates this reticular formation. Some collaterals, they cause stimulation of periaqueductal gray, which is some part of gray matter around the cerebral aqueduct, and some of the collaterals, they also cause stimulation of periventricular nucleus of hypothalamus. So various collaterals are given and they cause stimulation of various other pathways. Now the collaterals which cause stimulation of reticular formation, so that once reticular formation is stimulated, from here the various fibers, they go in an ascending manner to the cortex and they cause stimulation of various parts of cortex. So this increases the wakefulness of the person. So this is called as ascending reticular activated system. So the person is not able to sleep during pain, that is because of slow pain. The stimulation of periventricular hypothalamus, it causes autonomic symptoms such as increase in blood pressure, increase in heart rate, etc. Again, symptoms which are associated with the slow pain, that's bad pain. Now stimulation of periaqueductal gray, it actually acts as an analgesic mechanism and it causes stimulation of descending pain inhibiting pathway. We'll discuss it in a few moments. So on the other hand, fast pain gives a very little collateral, so these symptoms are not seen with fast pain, and both these fibers are present in the same tract, that's in the lateral spinothalamic tract. Now let us continue our discussion of pain. So let us discuss the mechanism of pain inhibition. The mechanism of pain inhibition. So there are various mechanisms by which our body tries to inhibit the pain pathway. So the first mechanism is the endogenous release of opioids. So opioids are endogenous secretion of opioids. Opioids are certain substances which act as analgesics. So analgesics are the substances which decrease pain. Our body endogenously produces some substances which act as opioids. These include enkephalins and endorphins. So whenever enkephalins and endorphins are produced in our body, there is inhibition of pain pathways which decreases pain. Now these substances, they are produced at the site of injury. They are also produced in the dorsal horn of spinal cord, and they are also produced in the reticular formation of the brainstem. So these are some of the sites where these endogenous opioids are produced, and the exercise, it causes more release of endorphins and that decreases pain, and these substances act as analgesics and decrease the perception of pain. Now another important mechanism for pain inhibition, it is called as the gate control theory. It's called as the gate control theory of pain inhibition. So gate control theory of pain inhibition, now let me explain it with the help of an example. When let us say there is a child and the child gets hurt, the child falls down and gets hurt. So in order to decrease the pain which is perceived by the child, we rub the skin of the child. Usually we rub the skin of the child and we believe that it decreases the pain. So it is true, and the concept can be explained with the help of this theory, that is gate control theory of pain inhibition. So whenever we rub the skin of the child, the pain pathway is inhibited, and it can be explained by gate control theory of pain inhibition. We'll see in a few moments. Now there's an important procedure which is called as transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation, and this procedure is done to decrease the pain in order to inhibit pain, and it's also based on gate control theory of pain inhibition. Let us say this is section of a spinal cord. This is the gray matter, dorsal spinal canal, dorsal root ganglion, ventral root, and this here is the spinal nerve. Now this is the dorsal root ganglion cell, Now these red fibers are the fibers which carry sensations for pain. So these are the sensations for pain. So they synapse in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord, and then fibers cross to the opposite side and ascend as lateral spinothalamic tract. So these are the fibers. These are, let us say, these are fibers for fast pain, that is A delta type of fibers. Now there are fibers for fine touch. So these fibers, again, they are the fibers of the posterior column. So this is the dorsal root first order cell. Again, it does not cross in the spinal cord. These fibers ascend directly to reach the medulla. These are A beta type of fibers of the posterior column for touch. Okay. Now whenever there is, so red fibers are for pain and blue fibers are for touch. So whenever the child falls down, there is stimulation of pain pathway. That means impulses are carried through these pain fibers, red fibers. However, we rub the skin of the child when, so touch receptors are stimulated, and these sensations are carried through the posterior column. Now whenever these sensations are carried with the posterior column, these posterior column fibers, they give certain collaterals, and these collaterals cause presynaptic inhibition of the pain pathway. So there is formation of an exoaxonal synapse which results in presynaptic inhibition of pain pathway. So there is presynaptic inhibition of pain pathway due to the formation of a synapse called as exoaxonal synapse, and as a result pain pathway will be inhibited. So this theory is called as gate control theory. Now this gate control theory, it was given by two scientists named as Melzack and Wall. So Melzack and Wall gave the gate control theory. So there are various applications of this gate control theory of pain inhibition. Now another important mechanism of pain inhibition is the descending pain inhibition pathway. Now it's a very important pathway. We discussed in the previous section in the pathway of the pain, the fibers of the slow pain, they give certain collaterals which stimulate periaqueductal gray, and periaqueductal gray causes certain analgesic mechanism. So this pathway starts from the periaqueductal gray. The neurons of the periaqueductal gray, they reach down into the pons, into the Raphe Magnus nucleus of the pons. So they synapse with the neurons of the Raphe Magnus nucleus of the pons. This is the Raphe Magnus nucleus. Now the neurons of the Raphe Magnus nucleus, they are serotonergic neurons. These neurons are serotonergic neurons, and these neurons also give various collaterals. So they are serotonergic neurons, and these neurons, they are serotonergic neurons, and they synapse with other inhibitory neurons which are enkephalinergic neurons. So now let us draw a spinal cord first. So if this is section of a spinal cord, so this is section of a spinal cord, this is the gray matter of spinal cord. Now this is the dorsal root ganglion cell. Here is the dorsal root ganglion cell which carries sensations for pain, and this is the first synapse, and fiber second order neuron crosses the opposite side and forms lateral spinothalamic tract. So these are the serotonergic neurons of the Raphe Magnus nucleus. Now they synapse with two inhibitory neurons which are enkephalinergic neurons, and these neurons cause presynaptic as well as postsynaptic inhibition of the pain pathway. So these neurons, Raphe Magnus neurons, they synapse with enkephalinergic neurons which cause presynaptic as well as postsynaptic inhibition of pain pathway. So let us try to understand it clearly. If this is the Raphe Magnus nucleus, these neurons are serotonergic. Now they give collaterals, and these collaterals as well as the neuron synapses with enkephalinergic neurons which are inhibitory in nature, and these enkephalinergic neurons, they cause presynaptic as well as postsynaptic inhibition of pain pathway. So this is these green fibers, they are the fibers of the pain, and so pain fibers, so they cause presynaptic as well as postsynaptic inhibition of these fibers. So that is how the pain is inhibited through the descending pathway which begins from the periaqueductal gray. Now the question is, what stimulates periaqueductal gray to cause inhibition of pain? So periaqueductal gray, it can receive signals from the cerebral cortex. From the cortex, it can also receive signals from hypothalamus, and the most important thing, periaqueductal gray itself, it is stimulated by the fibers of the slow pain. So fibers of slow pain itself cause stimulation of periaqueductal gray, and there is inhibition of pain pathway. So this is the descending pain inhibition pathway. Now there are certain other terms that we should know. First is allodynia. Allodynia means whenever a non-noxious stimulus causes painful sensation. For example, joint movement, which is normally a non-painful stimulus. If it causes pain, then the condition is called as allodynia, non-noxious stimulus. Another important term is hyperalgesia. Hyperalgesia means whenever there is heightened perception of pain. So the person feels pain more than normal. That's called as hyperalgesia. Hyperalgesia is of two types: primary hyperalgesia and secondary hyperalgesia. So primary hyperalgesia means whenever there is heightened perception of pain over an area of damaged skin. For example, in case of burns, whenever there are burns, the threshold for pain is decreased. So if the threshold for pain is decreased, that results in hyperalgesia in case of burns. Secondary hyperalgesia occurs when there is heightened perception of pain over normal skin. For example, if there is repeated painful stimuli are given to a portion of skin, then there will be oversensitization of that part of skin that will result in hyperalgesia. Now, let us discuss the last topic of today's lecture, which is called as Brown-Sequard syndrome. So Brown-Sequard syndrome is a group of symptoms that are seen whenever there is hemisection of spinal cord. It means whenever the lesion is only in one half of the spinal cord. Hemisection of spinal cord, that will result in a group of particular symptoms called as Brown-Sequard syndrome. So whenever there is hemisection of spinal cord, what is going to happen is there is going to be loss of some sensations on the same side from which there is lesion, and some sensations are going to be lost on the opposite side of the body, opposite to the lesion. So the sensations which are lost on the same side, logically saying, these are the sensations which are not crossed in the spinal cord. So these are sensations which are carried through the posterior column, because this column crosses in the medulla. So the sensations of proprioception, fine touch, vibration, 2-point discrimination, stereognosis, these are all lost on the same side as that of the lesion. Whereas the sensations of pain and temperature, because these sensations they cross in the spinal cord, so they are going to be lost on the opposite side, because crossing, they are carried through spinothalamic tract, and the crossing of these fibers occurs in the spinal cord. So these sensations are lost on the opposite side.